bear the fruit in our lives, we pray. Be with John now. Amen.
Good morning. And it really is a good morning. I have to say, I'm so excited by all that's happening here and all the stuff that I'm hearing and this new team forming. It just feels like God is preparing the ground. There is good stuff ahead. And it's delightful to be back. I haven't preached here for a Sunday morning for about 5 or 6 years, so it's really amazing to be back with you. So thank you so much for inviting me back. And I have to say, I've really enjoyed it so far. This is the scary bit, but just love the worship and everything, every part of it. And you've already heard the sermon once. The children's talk really said everything I was going to say. I was sitting there thinking, I was going to say that, I was going to say that. So I'll have to make something else up as we go. Anyway, here we go. I think it may be even last week, I was watching the news, and they had this story about builders who've been sort of sent into people's homes to help make them more insulated, to save costs. And the news item was saying that all these homes had all this work done on them. The trouble is it hadn't worked properly. And as a result of this insulation, houses were now with damp and mold. And they were kind of saying on the news that all these houses had to be redone. It was going to cost thousands of pounds. I was just thinking, what a waste. And then my mind was ticking over and I was thinking, I wonder if any of those builders deliberately knew that the work that they were doing was faulty. I mean, I've nothing against the building trade, but there are a few people known as cowboy builders out there, aren't there? I mean, that's kind of not well known. But then I thought to myself, I wonder how it would be if there were a Christian builder who was like a cowboy builder. That wouldn't be good, would it? You kind of expect that if you've got a Christian tradesperson, they're going to do a proper job, or at least you'd hope so. And so I was kind of thinking, Lord, I hope that none of these houses have been affected by bad Christian workmanship, because we are supposed to be people who are different, aren't we? We are supposed to make a difference, and we are supposed to do a proper job. And that really got me thinking about Daniel. And you've already heard a bit about Daniel. I want to speak a bit about Daniel today, but it reminded me of the words of Paul, actually, when he wrote to the church at Colossae. He said this: slaves, now I guess you could substitute their employers or employees or workers, obey your earthly masters in everything. And do it not only when their eye is on you to curry their favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. Is it not the Lord Christ you're serving? And that really spoke to me. I thought, crumbs, in whatever we do, whether we're working or whether we're engaging with other people in business, we are supposed to be different. We are supposed to be kingdom people who live differently to the world around us. And today's story of Daniel 6 is probably one of the best known stories in the Bible. It's about 2,500 years old, which blows my mind. I mean, we're talking about something written 2,500 years ago, and yet still speaks directly into our world in our day. Daniel, as we come to this chapter, is advanced in years and has a real test of his dedication. I think when life is easy and we're kind of coasting along, it's all okay, isn't it? But how do we do when the testing times come? How's Daniel going to cope facing probably the biggest test of his life? Well, that's what we're going to find out about this morning. So I'm just going to read Daniel chapter 6, verses 1 to 9. I think the words might come up if you want to follow them or follow it in your own Bibles. It says, "It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them, so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, 'We'll never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God.' So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king, and they had a plot." We'll find out about that in a minute. So this first section I want to just cover under the heading, "A Plot to Destroy Daniel. So Daniel 5 begins with a change of dynasty. In those days, superpowers came and went. The Babylonians were replaced by the Persians and the Medes. And the time we're reading about is around about, the 530s BC. It's a long, long time ago. And so the Medes and the Persians became the superpower of the world. And their first ruler was this guy called Darius. We don't know much about him. But when he came to the throne, he was about 62 years of age. And what he decided to do as he took over this vast empire was to have an administrative restructure. He decided that he would put in charge 120 satraps or satraps. Now that word means protectors of the kingdom. And I presume that each one of these guys would have like an area that they were in charge of, like a county council or something. Excuse me. And over these three administrators, 120 satraps, there would be 3 administrators. So these were the top guys who were in charge of 40 or so satraps. And their purpose was to make sure that the king didn't suffer loss. And of course, one of these guys was Daniel. And I love it that so exceptionally did Daniel do his job that the king planned to put Daniel over the whole of his kingdom. That was his plan. Daniel exceeded everybody's expectations, especially the king. In verse 3 it says, Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and satraps by his exceptional qualities. Which made me wonder, I wonder what they might have been. Maybe it's his honesty. I mean, you really need to have somebody in a top position who's honest, don't you? Maybe he was really diligent. This guy was never late for work. He was always there, working hard. Maybe it was his efficiency. Maybe it was just good management. Probably all the above. Daniel really shone out amongst all the other guys in the workplace. And as Darius saw this, he thought, I want that man to be my number 2. Which made me wonder. So if you're a worker here, when you go to work this week, I wonder if the same would be said for you. I wonder when people see you in the workplace, they say, wow, that person, they really work hard. Your diligence shines out. I wonder if that's the case. I wonder if we are well known in our workplace for all the right reasons and not the wrong reasons. Daniel stood out for all the best things. And of course, Daniel's good qualities endeared him to Darius. Darius thought he was brilliant because Darius could just party on while Daniel did all the hard work. But it didn't make him universally popular. Verse 4 tells us that the other administrators and the satraps wanted rid of him. There's nothing quite like having somebody who really works hard to make everybody else feel a bit ill at ease. But they couldn't find fault in anything that he did. I mean, how beautiful is that? This guy worked so hard and so conscientiously and so well. When they looked for fault, they couldn't find anything. I mean, doesn't that just speak of how good this guy was? He was described in verse 5 as being beyond reproach. Imagine that. I wonder is that said of you in your workplace? You know, the way they work is beyond reproach. What a high bar that sets. But surely that should be our aim, shouldn't it? If we're there for Jesus, we're in work tomorrow, shouldn't it be that we want to set a high standard so that people see we really mean business for God? So if Daniel was to be sidelined, if the rest of these guys want to get rid of him, they're not going to find fault in the way he does his work. So the plotters reason this. Daniel is faithful to Darius because, first of all, he's faithful to God. His spirituality guarantees his integrity. If we can put him in a position where he's got to make a choice between following God and following the king, that's the place we're going to catch him because undoubtedly he's going to follow his God. And so a plot comes to being. I wonder if that would be true of you and I. Would people know that in the workplace you are going to be so all for God that whatever comes our way, we're not going to compromise? Now, the trouble with coming back to a church you've once been in, most of you haven't heard all my stories before, but there is a story that came to mind when I was preparing this that I just want to sort of share with you. A number of years ago, well, a long time ago actually, before I went to Bible college, I had a period where I'd left my banking career and I was waiting to go to college, and I took a job working in a show home. There's quite a lot of show homes around Garstang these days. And the idea was that I would be there to show people around these brand new houses and try to secure the deal. Now, I was only going to be doing it for a few months, but I wanted to save as much as I could. But I took this job, and it was actually more stressful than I realized. Trying to get houses bought and sold is not an easy business. So anyway, I was sitting in this show home and I had to show people around and all the rest of it. And there came a time where the builder on this particular estate was really cross because the sales were low and wanted to push through some sales. So there was this situation where this person liked this house and said to me, I don't remember what the question was, but my sales manager basically said, look, John, we've got to get this sale through. Say whatever you need to say to get this sale done. I said, okay, well, I'm only going to tell him what's true. They said, I don't care about truth. You just say what you need to say. We've got to get this sale done. And I took a stand. I said to this person, well, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to lie just to get a sale. And they looked at me as if I was bonkers. I said, of course you're going to lie. This is a house selling business. I said, well, no, I won't. And it became a bit of a standoff. So this guy got really irate with me, but I refused to lie just to get a sale. It didn't go down terribly well, and I don't think we got the sale, but there we are. Now, a few months later, we had a kind of a big sales meeting, and everybody was kind of comparing different sites and things. And somebody said something about me which really wasn't true. And so I was kind of saying, well, that's not true. I didn't say that. And I was expecting to get all sorts of trouble. But this same sales manager that had been sort of pushing me to lie pipes up at this meeting and says, I've got to tell you, if John says he didn't do it, he didn't do it. This bloke doesn't lie. I was kind of gobsmacked. And I thought, wow, that I was so chuffed, actually, that this guy had actually realized that I wasn't prepared to lie just to get a sale. And I thought about that story, not because of anything particular about me, but I do think whenever a person stands for honesty and justice, it's going to make an impression. I mean, if you want to stand out at work, stick to your guns. I mean, there's so much, I think, about our day and age where people are pushed to compromise. Perhaps more than we often acknowledge. Every day we're in the world, we're going to be challenged to bend the rules or to tell little white lies in all sorts of arenas, not just the workplace. But if we're going to be called to stand for God, we've got to stand our ground. The plotters devised a plan and went as a group to the king. There was this plan of intimidation, of flattery and deception, tactics so often employed by our enemy. And it was suggested to the emperor to play on his vanity. For 30 days, the king should be regarded as the earthly representative of the gods. No one should pray to anybody else but Darius. And I can imagine Darius thinking, oh, sounds rather nice. And they played to his vanity. And they lied to him. They said, we're all in agreement about this. All the administrators and satraps, we've agreed for the next 30 days this would be the case. Except that wasn't true. There was one person who was missing from that particular encounter who certainly wouldn't have gone along with this idea. Daniel wasn't there. But the king, flattered as he was, acceded to their request. And in those days, when the king made a law, it couldn't be changed. Even if the king changed his mind, it couldn't be changed. That was part of the laws of the Medes and Persians. He sealed that instruction. And of course, in a polytheistic empire where everybody's praying to different gods, nobody would think too much about this except Daniel, who knew that you only pray to the one true God. God's law forbade him to pray to anyone else. And so here's a choice Daniel had. He could be a godly man who displeased the king and died, or an ungodly man who bent the rules and lived. What would he do? It's a choice faced by countless Christ followers down through the ages. It begs the question, well, what would you do? What would I do if that was the situation? Would we compromise, I wonder? And of course, these aren't always life and death choices. Sometimes they can be small things. But every time we face that choice, which way are we going to go? Are we going to go for Jesus? Or are we going to take the easy route? What would Daniel do? Well, let's read on, verses 10 to 17. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to God, just as he'd done before. Then all these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king, spoke to him about this royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, your majesty, will be thrown into the lion's den? And the king answered, the decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who's one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you. your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing." He still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to the king and said to him, "Remember, your majesty, what according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed." So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. I mean, this is amazing to me. Given this life and death sentence, or this life and death choice, Daniel, as verse 10 says, carried on as before. He was unshaken, unmoved, and unchanged. He had this daily habit of prayer, probably based on Psalm 55:17. He prayed to God 3 times a day, facing Jerusalem. He did it with all to see, and he didn't hide his faith or compromise in any way. I mean, isn't that incredible? Faced with death, he still does this. I mean, I've got to ask the question, what about you and I? What would you have done? What would I have done in that situation? And that begs the question, well, how did Daniel do this? How is it that an old man, as he was in these days, could stand firm and display such courage and faith? And I want to say such qualities don't come suddenly into a person's life. Daniel had established a lifelong habit of putting God first. I love it that young people coming into this church, and right from early age, they're being taught about God. They're learning these lifelong habits of putting God first. In fact, way back in Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, it says that when Daniel was only 14, he purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself. Right from a young age, he made that commitment. I love it that we're trying to encourage people of all ages to follow Jesus here. And that lifelong commitment stood him in good stead in this particular moment. And here's the thing, each time we resist temptation, our faith muscle grows. But each time we give in, our resistance weakens. You know, the big decisions, the big things happen because of small decisions along the way. Every little moment where we choose to compromise, when we stand firm, we get a little bit more assurance to keep standing firm. But I have to say, I'm convinced it wasn't simply willpower that got Daniel to this place, but his total reliance on God alone to give him strength. How would Daniel have gained such fortitude? Through his daily practice of prayer. 3 times a day. He wasn't just going through the motions. 3 times a day he was asking God to give him the strength to do all that God wanted him to do. But the temptation to give way must have been absolutely huge. I mean, you must imagine Daniel going through these things. Why not make life easier? Maybe I could just pray in a different way. I'd still be praying, but maybe I don't have to kind of do it in public. Maybe I could just compromise for 30 days. Just 30 days, and then we can get back to normal. That must have gone through his mind. Why make such a big deal of this? Why am I doing this? I mean, God doesn't command me to do this. Maybe I could just play along. And 3 times every day, Daniel must have faced similar temptations. Every time he knelt to pray, those voices inside must have come. Really? Do I need to do this? Our tempter, and we do have an enemy who tempts us, doesn't just come and go. He persists. Like water dropping on a stone, which actually will wear a stone away. He will come at us because he wants to wear us down. But I love it that Daniel didn't listen. I think really the battleground for Daniel wasn't in the lion's den. It was on that prayer mat every day before it. Just as Jesus' true battle wasn't on the cross, it was in Gethsemane when the tempter came before him. So the plotters have their ammunition. They saw Daniel at prayer and they went to the king, verse 12. They reminded Darius that Daniel wasn't really one of them. He's different. He's an outsider. And he doesn't honor you, king. And now we see that the most powerful person in the empire wasn't really powerful at all. He was in trouble at his own word. His foolish, rash decision meant that his number one guy was now sentenced to death. And actually, in fact, if you look through the Bible, on a number of the different occasions, there are stories of people who speak rashly and then wish they hadn't. haven't got time to go into that now. There's an old phrase that really speaks to this. Decide in haste, repent at leisure. Be careful what we say. But Daniel's fate was literally sealed. The plotters, they were probably rubbing their hands with glee. We've got him. Let's get rid of this annoying, hard-working so-and-so. And so Daniel was sentenced to death. And there wasn't a thing that Darius could do about it. But I suspect even in verse 16 you get a hint that maybe there was something about Daniel. Darius thought, maybe his God can save him. And so what happens? Let's read the rest of the story. Verse 18 onwards. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment. No Netflix binge watching for him. He could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions? And Daniel answered, may the king live forever. My God has sent his angel and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him because he trusted in God. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown in the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Wow. See, at first light of dawn, the king, desperately hoping, knowing that it's impossible for this to happen, just hoping that Daniel might be okay, he rushed to the grave. Could Daniel have survived? And I love it that this king who's just sentenced Daniel to death hears this voice, "O king, live forever." I mean, that's Daniel who would wish that for the king who's just sentenced him to death. The one accused of disloyalty still spoke blessing over his king. What loyalty? And again, I'm challenged here. In our situations at work, are we those who are known to be loyal? It's very easy to enter in the tittle-tattle of moaning about those who are over us, but do we enter into that, or do we actually stand out? Are we the ones who are known to be loyal to those who are over us? Daniel was. The voice of the man who everyone thought dead is courageously shouting life over his boss. I mean, how amazing. God had sent his angel into the den to shut the mouths of the lions, and Daniel comes out untouched. I mean, it's miraculous. But here's the thing, God did not deliver Daniel from trouble, but in trouble. The Bible tells us that all who want to live godly Christian lives can be certain of persecution. I guess one of our questions needs to be, if we're not suffering for our faith, why not? The only question is, how will we deal with it when it comes? Will we be like Daniel, standing firm in the path of compromise? But it must be said, whilst Daniel was saved, church history is littered with hundreds of thousands of names of those who similarly did not compromise, but who weren't saved from the lion's den. There are many Christian martyrs. Fox's Book of Martyrs is a book full of the names of people who stood their ground and paid the ultimate price. What of them? One commentator I read last week said, God will deliver us in the difficulty, even in martyrdom. There's no suffering, even martyrdom, from which we shall not emerge alive. See, that's our hope, is that actually one day, whether we die for Jesus or we don't, if in that sense of being persecuted, we will be freed. I mean, that's our ultimate hope. We have eternal life to look forward to. And just as certain as salvation is for those who believe, is judgment for those who do not. These are uncomfortable truths, but the Bible talks about those who choose not Jesus. They choose a different path. The king has the plotters thrown to their doom in accordance with Persian practice, and all their families go with them. I mean, it's a horrible scene. It's like their names are being wiped out because they'd chosen this path of plotting. And to confirm the miracle, when they went into the lion's den, they were torn to pieces straight away. And to conclude the story, it is King Darius who decrees to his people a confession of Darius' God. I mean, listen to this. This is incredible. This is a pagan king This is what he says because of what's just happened to Daniel. He says, the King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language in all the earth. He says, may you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. I mean, that's amazing. A pagan king sees the witness and the courage of this man Daniel and says, you guys, you need to pray to this God as well. He is the true God. It's amazing. But what if Daniel had compromised? What if Daniel had taken the easy route? What if he'd chosen self-protection over putting himself in that firing line? What could be lost when you and I fail to take our stand? Wherever we find ourselves, when we fail to stand on our faith, what possible things that God wants to bring are lost? As Paul said, I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory which will be revealed to us. You and my life matters perhaps more than we have any idea. When we go into the workplace or into our everyday lives this week, we go as Jesus. We go as a witness to him. How we live matters. And incidentally, the story of Daniel, I think, has many parallels with the story of Jesus. In both, jealous conspirators attack a righteous man. In both, the senior ruler is maneuvered to do what the conspirators plot. In both, the hero is placed in a tomb which is sealed. Game over, player one. In both, the righteous hero comes forth from the tomb alive. So what are some of the takeaways that we can go away with into our week? I'm wrapping up now, don't you worry. I did think I might go on for hours, but I'm going to be gracious. As the world we live in becomes increasingly secular, I suspect believers will increasingly find ourselves in positions where we're forced to make choice and compromise. It's going to happen more and more, I perceive it. In schools, in the workplace, all over the place, we are being pushed to deny the truths that we hold dear. Whether it's pressure to conform to ungodly laws in our land, or even the subtle pressure of political correctness, how will we decide where to draw the line? It's really important we know what we actually stand for. For Daniel, he was clear. There was nothing going to stop him praying to God in the manner that he'd always done. So how will we have the courage to stand strong? How will we be like a Daniel wherever God puts us? Well, I love this quote. Although it was Daniel's spiritual discipline of regular prayer that gave his enemies the opportunity to get him in trouble, that same discipline was the source of strength to stand firm in trouble. If you want to know the secret of standing firm when the trials come, Daniel shows us when he's on his knees in prayer 3 times a day. And I'm not saying you have to pray 3 times a day, but if our prayer life isn't strong, if it's not maintained, we will not have the power to stand firm when we're tested. It's not in our will, it's not in our strength, but in God's that we can take our stand. And ultimately, Daniel wasn't delivered simply for his own benefit, but actually so that God would be glorified. A lost king and a lost society saw something in Daniel that changed their perception and witnessed themselves to God. So this week, when the temptations to compromise come, when you feel that it's tough to take a stand, may your prayer life be the thing that gives you the courage and the fortitude to take your stand. You may not be in a lion's den, but wherever you stand this week, may you stand for Jesus and let shine out his truth and his love to a watching world, just as Daniel did. God bless you. Thank you for listening.